Welcome to Topicia, Inner Clarity. I'm just so glad you are here with us today.
Yes, warmly welcome. It's really wonderful to have you joining us.
Just imagine we are all sitting together right now in a quiet, comfortable room, just stepping away from the noise of the world and creating a space for some real inner clarity.
That sounds perfect. A space to really reflect.
Exactly. Because today we are undertaking a journey into a profoundly personal, sometimes deeply uncomfortable, but universally relevant question.
It's something every single one of us has either experienced or witnessed, probably more times than we can even count.
Yeah, we're asking the big one today. Why do people hurt each other without feeling guilty?
It is a heavy question, undeniably. But it's also, it's absolutely crucial if we want to understand the human condition.
Right.
Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the full spectrum of this phenomenon. We're mapping the mechanics of human cruelty, the isolation of accidental harm, and then right through to the ultimate antidote to all of it.
And to do that, we are looking at a truly fascinating stack of research. We're going to weave together the 19th century philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer.
Which is incredibly profound.
It really is. Along with modern psychological frameworks of moral disengagement and some deeply moving personal accounts of moral injury.
We want to understand the illusion of separation, the thing that allows us to inflict pain.
We'll examine the specific, insidious psychological tricks our minds use to just, turn off our guilt.
And then look at what happens when those tricks fail. The crushing nature of moral injury when we accidentally cause severe harm.
And finally, we'll explore Schopenhauer's concept of compassion as the ultimate recognition of our shared existence. So take a breath, settle in, and let's unpack this together.
To understand why we hurt each other, we first have to establish the baseline of existence, and the research points us directly to Arthur Schopenhauer.
Right, because he doesn't start with just psychology, does he?
No, not at all. He starts with a radical premise about the fabric of the universe itself. He argues the universe is not driven by reason or logic or some divine plan.
It's driven by something else entirely.
Exactly. A blind, striving, relentless, and completely irrational force. He calls this force the will, or the will to life.
So when I was reading through this, I really had to stop and wrap my head around that word. Because we usually use will to describe personal determination, like willpower.
Sure, like forcing yourself to go to the gym.
Yeah. But Schopenhauer is talking about something much bigger than that.
Much, much bigger. For Schopenhauer, the will is the fundamental reality of everything. You, me, the trees outside your window, the animals, even the rocks.
They're all the same thing.
They're all just different physical manifestations of this single, undivided will. And in its purest essence, this will sits completely outside of space and time.
Okay, so it's just pure energy.
Pure, constant, endless striving. And here is the critical part. Because it is always striving, it's always in a state of lack. It constantly wants something it does not have.
And that concept of constant lack leads directly to what might be Schopenhauer's most jarring view on human life. It flips our modern understanding of happiness and pain completely upside down.
It really does.
He argues that pain is the positive baseline of existence. And just to clarify for everyone listening, when he says positive here, he absolutely does not mean good.
Right. In philosophical terms, positive just means it has an active, undeniable reality. It asserts itself and makes its existence actively felt.
Like if you stub your toe.
Exactly. Or if you lose a loved one. You don't have to try to feel that pain. It forces its way into your consciousness. It is a positive reality.
Whereas happiness, he defines as merely negative.
Yes.
No, wait. I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Because my immediate reaction was to push back hard on that. It sounds almost hopelessly dark.
It's a very natural reaction to push back.
Is he seriously suggesting that joy or love or the thrill of a great achievement doesn't actually exist as a positive force?
Most of us are conditioned to believe happiness is the baseline we return to, and pain is just an interruption. But Schopenhauer argues that what we call happiness is, in reality, nothing more than the temporary removal of pain.
The cessation of suffering.
Exactly. It's the fleeting moment when that relentless striving of the will is momentarily satisfied. Think about hunger.
Okay, hunger is a pain. It's a lack.
Right. When you eat a wonderful meal, the pleasure you feel is actually just the quieting of that lack. But because the will is fundamentally a relentless striving, the satisfaction never lasts.
You're going to be hungry again.
You will be hungry again. You will want something else. The lack returns. Happiness is just the brief, quiet space between different types of suffering.
I see the logic, even if it is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And the research actually provides a striking visceral analogy for this.
The animal analogy.
Yeah. It asks you to consider a scenario in nature to understand if pleasure or pain carries more existential weight. Schopenhauer says, compare the feelings of two animals, one that is currently engaged in eating the other.
It's a brutal image, but it perfectly captures his point. The animal that is eating, its pleasure is fleeting. It's just a biological urge being satisfied.
A brief quieting of the hunger.
Yes. But now consider the animal being eaten, its pain, its terror, its desperate struggle for life. That experience is absolute. It is overwhelming.
It's infinitely more profound in its reality than the predator's mild satisfaction.
The suffering carries a much heavier, more undeniable existential weight.
Wow. Let me just sit with that for a second. The asymmetry there is staggering. So if we take this as our baseline, that we are all manifestations of one endlessly striving will, and Cain is the fundamental reality.
It brings up a huge question.
A massive one. If you and I are ultimately the same thing, the same will, why do we feel so incredibly separate? Why am I sitting in traffic screaming at the person who just cut me off, feeling like they are my mortal enemy? Why do we fight over resources if we are fundamentally one?
That is the pivotal question. And Schopenhauer answers it with the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation.
And this is about how our brains perceive reality, right?
Exactly. We do not perceive the raw, unified will directly. We perceive the world through cognitive faculties, specifically space and time.
Which chop reality up.
Space and time take this single, undivided reality and chop it up into seemingly separate, isolated objects.
The research uses a really helpful analogy here, comparing our perception to looking through a kaleidoscope.
Yes, when you look through a kaleidoscope, you see 100 shattered, distinct little fragments of light. But the fragmentation isn't in the object you're looking at.
It's the lens.
The fragmentation is entirely a property of the lens you are looking through. Space and time are the kaleidoscope. We look out and see me here and you over there.
But Schopenhauer argues that separation is a complete illusion. The boundary is a cognitive trick.
Exactly.
Tying this back to my traffic analogy because I think it grounds this lofty philosophy. When someone cuts me off, my kaleidoscope lens is working overtime.
You don't see another manifestation of the universal will who is stressed out and running late.
No, I see a phantom. I see a separate, hostile object occupying the space my car wants to occupy. The illusion is so absolute, I feel justified in my anger.
And keeping that illusion in mind, Schopenhauer breaks down human behavior into 3 empirical motives, the basic drives that push us to act.
Let's go through those.
The first is egoism, striving for your own well-being. The second is malice, actively desiring another person's suffering. And the third is compassion, desiring another's well-being.
If we are exploring why people hurt each other, we have to look closely at egoism and malice. Starting with egoism, which seems like the default setting for most of us.
It is the biological baseline, the survival instinct. But psychologically speaking, for the extreme egoists, other people are barely real.
Because they're trapped in the illusion.
Deeply trapped. They view themselves as the absolute center of the universe. Everyone else is just a prop, an obstacle, or a tool.
So they don't necessarily wake up wanting to cause pain.
No. But if causing you pain gets them what they want, promotion, money, convenience, they will inflict it incidentally. They hurt you because your reality simply doesn't register as equal to their own.
But then we move to the second motive, malice. And the research makes a crucial distinction here. Schopenhauer argues malice is morally far worse than egoism.
Much worse.
Initially, I wondered why. Harm is harm, right? But the reasoning is fascinating. The egoist ignores your reality. But to actively desire someone else's suffering, you actually have to recognize their internal reality.
Yes. You have to understand, they are a conscious being capable of feeling pain, exactly like you are.
It's a dark paradox.
Very dark. The malicious person sees through the illusion just enough to recognize the other's capacity for pain. They see the shared vulnerability.
But they twist it.
Exactly. Instead of feeling connection through that shared capacity to suffer, they use it to reinforce their own ego, to reinforce the illusion of separation.
They inflict suffering deliberately to prove their power,
to assert their dominance over the other.
The research on the nature of cruelty echoes this beautifully. It suggests cruelty traps us in a world where innocence is fundamentally betrayed.
Philosophically speaking, we are misunderstanding the fabric of reality itself. We are buying completely into the lie of the kaleidoscope.
Choosing the illusion over the truth. So we have this philosophical foundation. We see how the perceived separation enables egoism and malice. But this brings us to a very practical, modern psychological problem.
Right, because most people don't view themselves as malicious villains.
Exactly. Most people think of themselves as good, ethical people. So if separation is an illusion, how exactly do we convince ourselves day in and day out to hurt others without being crushed by guilt?
How do we artificially turn off natural empathy?
That is the bridge into modern psychology. How do we build the walls that let us sleep peacefully after causing harm? The research provides a specific term for this: a diametric spatial structure.
It sounds academic, but it's a brilliant visualization. Think of it as a thick partition, an absolute, impenetrable barrier that the everyday person places between themselves and the rest of the world.
The mental architecture of assumed separation.
And if we want to understand the architect who built that thick partition, modern psychology points us to Albert Bandura. He developed the theory of moral disengagement.
This is a meticulously mapped, step-by-step psychological process.
It's how we convince ourselves that our own ethical standards simply do not apply in a particular context, toward a particular group. It's the cognitive machinery we use to disable self-condemnation.
The ultimate loophole. It's how good people do terrible things without feeling the sting of guilt. And the research breaks down the specific mechanisms of this moral disengagement in detail.
These are the bricks and mortar we use to build that wall of separation.
Let's spend some real time exploring each one, because they map perfectly onto Schopenhauer's thick partition. Let's start with the first one, moral justification.
Arguably the most powerful tool in the arsenal. This is when harmful behavior is cognitively restructured to be seen as serving a higher moral purpose.
You aren't doing something bad. You are making a necessary sacrifice for a greater good.
We see this constantly in history. Terrible acts of violence committed in the name of righteous ideologies or nationalistic imperatives. The harm isn't denied, but the moral valence of the act is flipped entirely.
It's terrifying because the perpetrator feels heroic, not guilty. And actually, just a quick note before we get deeper into the military and political examples from the research.
Right, it's very important to clarify. We are looking at these strictly through the lens of psychological theory to understand how human cognition works.
Exactly. We are impartially reporting the mechanisms described in the source material. We are not endorsing or taking sides on any political viewpoint.
We are just observing the operating system of moral bypass. Which brings us to the second mechanism, which is deeply insidious because it's so common: euphemistic labeling.
Sanitizing language to disguise harm.
Language fundamentally shapes our emotional reality. If we change the words we use to describe an action, we completely change how that action feels in our gut.
It feels like something out of George Orwell. You call an action something sterile or technical, and it doesn't sound like a moral violation anymore.
The research gives chilling military examples. Instead of saying a human being was killed, they are wasted. A bombing mission is servicing the target.
And the deaths of innocent civilians are swept under the rug as collateral damage. The language builds the partition.
And we use this in the corporate world every day. When a company fires 500 people, executives talk about downsizing or creating synergies.
They aren't firing someone, they're offering a career alternative enhancement.
By dressing up a painful action in administrative vocabulary, the individual making the decision is liberated from personal guilt. They aren't hurting people, they're optimizing a spreadsheet.
It's a linguistic sleight of hand. You trick your own conscience. Which leads to the third mechanism: advantageous comparison, exploiting the contrast principle.
Minimizing your own destructive behavior by holding it up against something vastly worse. The ultimate "yeah, but" defense.
Sure, the working conditions are terrible, but at least these people aren't starving on the streets.
Or, personally, I know I was verbally abusive, but at least I didn't hit them. By anchoring your behavior against a worst-case scenario, the thick partition remains intact.
Then we get into shifting the blame, displacement, and diffusion of responsibility. Let's look at displacement first. Viewing your actions not as your autonomous choices, but as the dictates of an authority figure.
I was just following orders. This transfers the moral weight upward. If a legitimate authority accepts responsibility, the individual's internal moral control shuts down.
They stop viewing themselves as a moral agent.
They become merely a functionary. The person giving the order doesn't carry out the physical harm, and the person doing the harm doesn't carry the moral responsibility.
The research points to tragedies like the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War as an extreme historical illustration. The soldiers convinced themselves the moral accountability stayed above them.
which is closely related to diffusion of responsibility. Displacement shifts blame up, diffusion spreads it out. This happens in groups.
The larger the group, the more the responsibility is fractured.
Paradoxically, if everyone is responsible, no one feels personally accountable. It's often achieved through a complex division of labor.
The dark side of teamwork, like in modern technology. One person writes code, another assembles a microchip, someone authorizes a strike. No single person feels like they pulled the trigger.
The division of labor is the ultimate thick partition. And that sets up the next mechanism perfectly, disregarding or misrepresenting consequences. This is all about distance.
Physical and psychological distance. It's infinitely easier to hurt someone when you do not have to look them in the eye.
If the harm is overlooked or kept out of sight, there is no reason for self-censure to trigger. We see this in remote push-button warfare. The distance removes the visceral reality of the pain.
And we see it everywhere on the internet. Cyberbullying. The screen is the partition. You type something horrific, but because you don't see their face fall, your brain doesn't register the harm.
Out of sight means out of moral mind. Finally, we reach the most disturbing mechanism of all, dehumanization.
This is where the partition becomes an absolute fortress.
Moral disengagement relies heavily on how we view the victims. Dehumanization systematically denies them their essential humanness. The research divides this into two distinct cognitive aspects.
Let's break those down.
First, denying uniquely human attributes. Stripping the target of traits associated with higher civility or morality, conceptually likening victims to animals.
Labeling them as savage or biologically inferior.
Yes. The second aspect is denying human nature attributes, our deeper emotional capacities like hope, remorse, or complex love. When you deny these, you liken victims to unfeeling objects or machines.
The historical examples in the research are incredibly stark. It notes how regimes have utilized this to pave the way for atrocities. The specific rhetoric used by the Nazis, referring to Jewish people as rats.
Denying uniquely human attributes, reducing them to vermin.
And propaganda during the Rwandan genocide, referring to Tutsis as cockroaches. Observing these historical facts demonstrates the terrifying power of this trick.
When you convince a population that a group is animalistic or emotionally hollow, you completely remove them from the moral circle. It becomes psychologically easy to inflict violence.
When you look at all these mechanisms operating together, justifications, euphemisms, displacement, dehumanization, you are looking at the complete architecture of Schopenhauer's thick partition.
The blueprint of how the human ego builds an impenetrable fortress to protect itself from the reality of the pain it causes.
It's a massive defense system. And I was curious reading this, is everyone equally good at building these fortresses?
The research actually points out significant individual differences. Moral disengagement is much easier for people with high trait cynicism.
Meaning a deep underlying distrust of human nature.
Yes. If you genuinely believe everyone is fundamentally selfish and manipulative, it is incredibly easy to justify treating others poorly. They would do it to me, so I'm striking first.
The cynicism validates the partition. The research also highlights an external locus of control.
If you believe your actions are dictated by outside forces, luck, fate, the system, you are much more likely to displace responsibility.
If you aren't in the driver's seat, you don't feel responsible for who you run over.
What is truly sobering is that these mechanisms are not reserved solely for atrocities. We all use them in routine lives. The research points to widespread practices, like meat consumption.
That is such a compelling everyday example. Most people consider themselves animal lovers, yet participate in a system of immense animal suffering.
They bridge that gap using these exact mechanisms, specifically the denial of human nature attributes. They convince themselves food animals do not experience complex emotions.
That they don't feel despair or maternal bonds the way we do.
By minimizing the emotional reality of the animal, society morally disengages to avoid profound guilt. We selectively apply the thick partition to navigate daily life without being crushed by the ethical weight.
We spend a lot of time mapping the dark side here, the relentless striving, the illusion of separation, the psychological armor. But here is where the conversation takes a vital turn.
What happens when the armor fails?
Yes, when the thick partition gets pierced, and we actually do feel the pain we have caused.
This requires us to pivot our focus entirely, from the avoidance of guilt to the anatomy of true guilt. And we look at the insights of clinical psychologist Dr. Becky Kennedy.
She offers a brilliantly clear definition of guilt that cuts through our cultural confusion. She argues guilt is a feeling we experience when we act out of alignment with our own internal values.
And this is the vital part. True guilt is a remarkably useful biological and psychological signal.
It's an internal alarm bell.
Yes, it's intensely uncomfortable, but it forces us to reflect. I value honesty, but I lied. What got in my way? What do I need to do differently?
Guilt is the compass recalibrating itself. The research provides a simple example. A child stealing an eraser. They confess and feel terrible.
That is a healthy response. The guilt signals that stealing conflicts with their values. It serves as a natural deterrent.
But, and this is a massive but, people frequently confuse true values-aligned guilt with something entirely different.
Dr. Kennedy notes this is very often seen in women and mothers due to societal conditioning. They confuse guilt with the act of taking on other people's emotions.
False guilt. The research gives a highly relatable example. A mother who hasn't seen friends in months plans a dinner. As she's leaving, her young child starts crying, deeply distressed.
The mother's heart breaks. She cancels her plans, stays home, and says, "I felt so guilty leaving her."
Unpacking that with Dr. Kennedy's definition, did the mother act out of alignment with her values by planning to go out? No. She values her friendships, so why the heavy feeling?
The research suggests this isn't guilt. It is fundamentally a boundary issue. We learn to constantly manage everyone else's feelings while ignoring our own.
Dr. Kennedy uses a wonderful visual analogy for this. Picture a tennis court, but instead of a net, there is a solid floor-to-ceiling glass partition. You are on one side, your crying child is on the other.
Healthy empathy requires you to walk up to the glass, look through, and validate their distress. I see you are sad I am leaving. But crucially, it remains their distress, on their side of the court.
You see it, but you don't absorb it. In false guilt, the child's distress metaphorically smashes right through the glass partition.
It physically invades your body. You absorb their sadness at the expense of your own needs. And because society lacks a better vocabulary, you mislabel that painful absorption as guilt.
Giving the feeling back to its rightful owner is actually the most empathetic thing you can do. Maintaining the glass partition allows you to be a sturdy presence.
That distinction is life-changing. But the research introduces a third, much heavier category. What happens when the thick partition doesn't just leak, but completely shatters?
Because we unintentionally cause severe, irreversible harm.
This is the territory of moral injury. True guilt is a signal to course correct. False guilt is a boundary collapse. But moral injury is a profound shattering of the self.
It occurs when our actions violate our core moral foundations so deeply that our sense of who we are is destroyed. The research shares a deeply personal, incredibly moving story to illustrate this.
The story of Marianne Jacoby Gray.
Over 40 years ago, she was driving down a country road. An 8-year-old boy named Brian darted out from between cars. She tried to swerve, but it was physically impossible to stop in time.
She hit him, and tragically, the little boy died.
It's an absolute nightmare, an unimaginable situation. She spent years studying the aftermath. She describes the profound, devastating loneliness that immediately follows.
A toxic combination of guilt, profound shame, self-condemnation, and an overwhelming instinct for defensiveness.
But the absolute worst part, the part that defines the moral injury, is the alienation. We have a biological need to belong to the group. When we become an unintentional perpetrator, we feel permanently cut off.
You feel like a monster, fundamentally separate. She describes sitting in the back of a police car at the scene, entirely isolated in shame.
But then something remarkable happened. A woman came out of a nearby farmhouse. She walked to the police car, convinced the officers to open the door, and handed Marianne a glass of cold water.
She eventually brought her into her own kitchen so she wouldn't have to wait alone. In the midst of the most profound isolation, that woman offered a lifeline of human connection.
Reading about that glass of water honestly brought tears to my eyes. Society's instinct is to cast out the person who caused the harm. But that woman saw a human being in agony.
And this isolation isn't limited only to fatal accidents. The research includes an example involving the comedian Amy Poehler.
During an SNL sketch, she unintentionally mocked people with severe disabilities. She later discovered she had deeply hurt a real young woman.
Amy Poehler described her immediate reaction as a classic trauma response. She pretended it went away. She hid from it. She was terrified to listen to the voice inside telling her she screwed up.
The shame was too intense. It took her 5 full years of hiding behind walls of avoidance before she dismantled the partition and offered a genuine apology.
Just like Marianne kept her accident a guarded secret for 20 years.
This raises a critical point about how society reacts. People around the perpetrator often pull away. We don't know what to say. We leave them stranded inside their thick partition of shame.
We leave them on the other side of the kaleidoscope. So the vital question becomes, how do we heal this? How does someone find their way back to humanity?
Marianne points to 3 necessary conditions for regaining connection. The first is accountability.
You have to own the damage. Marianne was not legally culpable. There was nothing she could have done. But she was the instrument of the tragedy, and she had to bravely acknowledge that reality.
Stepping out of the shadows. The second condition is compassion, flowing in 2 directions. Receiving it from others, like the woman with the water, but also extending deep compassion to oneself.
Recognizing that the person who caused the harm is also a human being in agony, and that very pain, that crushing guilt, is evidence of their humanity.
Sociopaths do not suffer moral injury. The pain proves you belong. And the third condition is community.
Active peer support. We need to give back. To heal the tear in the social fabric, we have to make amends or dedicate ourselves to making the world better in honor of what was lost.
There is a beautiful mythological connection in the research here. The ancient Greek myth of the god Apollo and his mortal lover, Hyacinth.
They were throwing a heavy discus, and Apollo accidentally struck Hyacinth, inflicting a fatal wound.
Apollo was devastated. He experienced all the agony of the unintentional perpetrator, but because he was divine, he refused to let tragedy be the end of the story.
From Hyacinth's spilled blood, Apollo created the hyacinth flower, ensuring something beautiful grew from the site of the terrible accident.
It's a gorgeous metaphor. We all make mistakes. We have the choice to try and create something beautiful from our errors. But, as Marianne points out, Apollo was a god. We are only human.
We cannot do it alone. We desperately need each other, accountability, compassion, and community to heal the injuries we sustain and inflict.
We need each other to plant the flowers. And this concept of healing through depth connection brings our deep dive beautifully back to where we started, Arthur Schopenhauer.
We've traced the whole arc, the illusion of separation, moral disengagement, the devastation of moral injury. So we asked the philosopher, what is the ultimate antidote?
The cure.
For Schopenhauer, it lies in a single powerful concept he called Mitleid.
Mitleid. Translated literally, it means suffering with. Deep ontological compassion. And to grasp how radical this is, we have to understand his disagreement with Immanuel Kant.
Kant believed true morality had to be derived from pure abstract reason, a categorical imperative. You do the right thing because logic dictates it, stripped of messy human emotion.
But Schopenhauer looked at human behavior and basically said, that is completely unrealistic. You cannot spreadsheet your way into genuine empathy.
Abstract concepts do not move human beings to act morally. Remember his baseline, we are driven by the blind, striving will. Logic isn't strong enough to override that.
We need an empirical, genuinely felt motive, something powerful enough to overcome biological egoism.
And that feeling is Mitleid. To visualize how this works, the research introduces a contrast to the diametric thick partition. Compassion operates on a concentric spatial structure.
Picture the geometry. 2 separate circles representing 2 individuals. In egoism, they never touch. The wall is between them. But in compassion, the circles overlap. They share a center point.
The architecture of assumed connection.
The exact opposite of the kaleidoscope illusion. The thick partition dissolves. As Schopenhauer phrases it, the other person becomes an I once more.
We suffer with them, and therefore we suffer in them. The boundary of the self expands.
Now, as beautiful as that sounds, it drew fierce criticism, notably from Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche disguised this concept. He called it a dangerous doubling of the ego.
And I think his concern makes sense initially. If we genuinely absorb everyone else's pain, the sheer weight of that misery will destroy us. We'd be paralyzed.
He viewed it as a slave morality that glorified weakness, a recipe for collective depression.
But the research defends Schopenhauer against this by looking at Platonic ideas.
Yes, Nietzsche took the concentric structure too literally. True compassion isn't just selfishly absorbing pain, nor is it melting entirely into the other person and losing your identity.
Above the individual you and me, there is the overarching idea of humanity. We remain distinct entities at the level of these ideas. We make less of a distinction, but we don't erase the boundary.
It's exactly like a Venn diagram. We share the center space of suffering, but retain our distinct edges. We feel the other person's pain as theirs. We don't hijack their trauma.
This prevents the paralyzing doubling of the ego. We can offer real support without being annihilated by the world's misery. And there's another critical nuance here.
The absolute primacy of feeling over cognition. Compassion is an immediate, intuitive event.
You don't read a textbook, logically deduce we are manifestations of a singular will, and then decide to be nice. It happens in the exact opposite order.
It is entirely visceral. You immediately feel the pain of the other person. You wince when someone trips. You cry when someone grieves.
That gut punch comes first. The unthinking physical feeling of shared pain then reveals the metaphysical truth of our shared existence. You cannot argue someone into true compassion.
And no amount of cynical logic can reason that feeling away once it hits you.
Does this profound connection apply only to human beings?
Absolutely not. Schopenhauer extends this to animals and ultimately the whole of nature. Because all things are manifestations of the one will, all things can experience a thwarted will. All of nature suffers.
But it operates in degrees based on consciousness.
Yes, the suffering of a plant is a quiet suffering, lacking a nervous system to amplify it. But higher consciousness means sharper intellect and exponentially more acute pain. Our moral obligation increases proportionally.
So bringing this all together, if we accept that our perceived separation is an illusion and true connection is found in suffering with all of creation, what is the practical application? How do we actually live tomorrow morning?
Schopenhauer distills it into a singular moral rule. Harm no one, rather help everyone to the extent that you can.
It sounds basic, but it carries the weight of the universe. Harming another isn't just mean, it is quite literally harming oneself.
And this compassion isn't just reactive. Schopenhauer believed in anticipatory compassion. Our empathy can cross space and time. We can care about people thousands of miles away or future generations.
And this leads to his ultimate theory of salvation. The everyday world of individual striving, the hamster wheel of egoism, is a tragic error, a dream. When we experience profound mitleid, we wake up.
Breaking the veil of Maya, this deep compassion eventually leads to the quieting of the will, a state of complete willlessness where an individual simply stops fighting. They stop harming altogether.
It's not reached by thinking hard. It's an embodied realization, sparked by enduring our own intense suffering or participating deeply in the suffering of the world until the engine of the ego burns out.
We reach enduring peace only by surrendering the illusion of our separate selves.
Let's take a deep breath and look back at the incredible journey we've been on today. We started by staring into the realities of egoism and moral disengagement. The diametric spaces we build, justifications, euphemisms, dehumanization, all to hurt people without feeling guilt.
We explored the isolating weight of moral injury when those partitions shatter, and the absolute necessity of accountability, self-compassion, and community to heal.
And finally, Schopenhauer's concentric vision of mitleid, the realization that the boundary between you and me is a distortion of the lens. To cause harm to another is to inflict a wound upon oneself.
We want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. If Schopenhauer's right, that happiness is just the temporary absence of pain, and our truest metaphysical connection is forged through the shared experience of suffering,
then perhaps our moments of deepest, agonizing empathy aren't a weakness to be cured.
perhaps the pain we feel when we bravely open ourselves to the suffering of another isn't a flaw. In a world built on illusions of separation, those moments of shared pain are perhaps the only moments we are truly, undeniably awake.
A profound thought to carry with you. We ask you to continue this journey, to question the thick partitions in your own life, and to keep seeking true connection. Thank you for joining us today, for your time and attention. Please join us for all our future deep dives at Topikia, Inner Clarity.
Thank you. Take care of yourselves and each other.